While we're in between games, let's have a conversation about the salary cap, the reports of how high it's about to go, even higher in the next 2 years, and where the Sabres fall into this. A team that many wonder if they have an internal salary cap. There's a lot of meat on this bone. The NHL, the Sabres, and the salary cap. Let's break it down coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making the Locked On Sabres podcast your first listen every day. Sneaky Joe DiBiase on today's show. Be sure to check us out wherever you listen to your podcasts. That includes our YouTube channel where you could watch the show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Still searching for a great candidate for your company? Don't search, just match with Indeed. Sneaky Joe DiBiase coming to you on a Tuesday in between games here as we get ready for the Kings on Wednesday night. That'll be a morning watch for me, a 4 a.m. wake-up call. You know, get the treadmill out, walk while I'm watching the game. It'll be my routine on Wednesday morning. I'll be looking back at your texts and tweets as the game is ongoing. So we got a day to get to. I'm excited. I know, finances, right? Like, what's more exciting than finances? The NHL and the salary cap is a big developing story right now in the world of hockey. And the Sabres have some real questions to answer going forward. So a lot to get into when it comes to that. And whether the reports that we've seen might indicate, connecting some dots, the Sabres are trying to add a high-priced addition during the season. Get to that coming up on today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast. Also stick around, a little bit of a mailbag segment of today's show coming up as well. If you want to check us out on our Locked On Sabres text club, if you'd like to ask a question that's answered on the show or you want it answered in the text club, you can sign up for that text club by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. You sign up there, a couple bucks a month, nothing crazy, less than the cup of coffee that I had this morning. That always seems to be the way that people compare those prices, right? Cup of coffee. It's less than the cup of coffee that I had this morning. So check us out there. All your news updates, all your game day banter back and forth as the games are going on. Not Wednesday, though, because I'll be asleep when it's a 10:30 puck drop. But that's where you can check us out there. Twitter, @LockedOnSabres. Blue Sky, you can check me out. I'm there, @Sneaky Joe, if you're venturing over to the new Twitter, if you will. Lot to get to in today's show. I actually want to start, though, very briefly before we get to the Sabres and the salary cap story with some league news and notes, because today was kind of a big news day in the NHL. Right before we started recording this show, the Boston Bruins announced that they have fired head coach Jim Montgomery. And that was a little bit of a stunner, but maybe it shouldn't be that stunning because the Bruins have been a team that's been willing to fire their coach even after pretty good success. So the fact that they would be willing to fire their coach after an 8-9-3 start shouldn't maybe be that surprising. It also comes on the heels of getting beat badly by a lowly Columbus Blue Jackets team. So the timing, I guess, isn't that stunning. It's still, wow, the Bruins fired their coach. That's an organization that has no margin for error. You lose, you're out. That's it. We move on from you quickly. Joe Sacco, by the way, who was the Avalanche head coach a long time ago. He was actually the Sabres assistant coach a couple of years ago. What years were those? He was with the Sabres from 2013. I guess actually it was only for a year. Yeah, he was only with the Sabres for a year, 2013. He is now the head coach of the Boston Bruins, at least going forward. So the Bruins make a big change. That's a team that is not going to settle. They're in a win now mode. They're still in a playoff spot, but they are not settling clearly for the results that they've had. They want to be a top 3 team in the division. They don't look like they're getting those types of results, so they're moving on. The other big news from the NHL, Alex Ovechkin, 5 goals in his last 2 games. The number one thing in the league this year is the Ovechkin-Gretzky chase. He is closing in, and he is closing in fast on Wayne Gretzky's record. After this last couple of games that he's had, he leads the NHL in goals. He is 28 goals away from the record. So he's getting there. But brutal news. After going down with an injury last night, Ovechkin has a knee injury. He's out week to week. Now, to tie this in for the Sabres a little bit, we'll see how long he's out. I think there's no doubt, unless he's out for months, I think he's going to break that record this year. He is playing so well this season. He is kind of carrying the Capitals, by the way, to their success that they've had early on at 13-4-1. They've been incredible. And a lot of it's that their best player, Alex Ovechkin, has showed back up and looks like the best goal scorer in hockey. Turning back the clock, not too long ago, 3 years ago he was that. 4 years ago he was that, but he's looking like it again. He was on pace to break the record in late February. And that was going to be like at Pittsburgh, home Edmonton. There was a home stretch in there for Washington. The Sabres play the Capitals on March 30th. So if he's going to miss like 10 games here, that's going to put it real close. His pace for how many goals he's scoring to when he could break the record, March 30th. Watch that date. It's an afternoon game. It's a Sunday at 3 o'clock in D.C. Capitals hosting the Sabres. And if he's out for a couple weeks, that might be right around when he would break the record, which will be one of the biggest moments in hockey history. I don't know if you necessarily, if you're a Sabres fan, if you want the record broken against the Sabres. I'm guessing you probably don't. It's not like it would be horrendous. It's a regular season game, but we'll see what ends up happening on that front. So, okay, that's the news from elsewhere around the league. I do want to get to this other news from the league that does affect the Sabres and, of course, every other team, which in the past couple of days, Elliot Friedman's been breaking this down over at Sportsnet. The Athletic has had some really good stories on this as well. A lot of details that the NHL is planning to raise the cap in a big way in the next couple of years. And the reason why is just a layman's terms, as best as I could simplify this. The NHL, when they had the COVID stuff happen, when COVID happened and the NHL revenues went down from, they were 5.1 million in 2019 to 4 million in 2020. So a drop in that was COVID related. Then a full calendar year of COVID, 2020-21, $2.1 billion, less than half of where they were 2 years ago. And since then, the world's been normalizing, right? Back to the way things were. The revenue has climbed back up to where it was headed before COVID happened. So this past season, revenue was $6.2 billion in the NHL. And the way that the salary cap used to work before COVID was it would the cap would reflect revenues because there's all this escrow stuff as well, of course. Well, the escrow's been paid out. So now the NHL is ready to go back to the salary cap reflecting revenue. That's to me the simplest way that I understand it. So they're ready for that. And last season, revenue was $6.2 billion. The cap was only at $83 million, the same $83 million that it was when the COVID revenues were coming in. So not as high as it should be. In fact, The Athletic had a piece that broke down that the cap this year should have really been around like $92, $93, $94 million. A lot higher than it is right now. $6 million higher, maybe even. And that this explosion of revenue since COVID is going to, and with the cap not yet reflecting it, we're going to get a big jump, a massive jump. $88 million this year is the salary cap. I guess reading this for Friedman broke this down from the CBA. The NHL in one offseason is not allowed by the agreement they deal with the players union. They're not allowed to raise the cap more than 5%. So next year, as this is broken down again in the stories I'm reading about it, next year, the cap, if it was going to reflect the revenue, would be $105 million. But it can't go up that high because that's more than 5%. So that's where you see this number being tossed around right now by Friedman and everybody, $97 million. Okay, everybody following me so far? All in all, to summarize the whole thing, if you want to skip the description for why things are happening, and I'm not the perfect person to tell you why all this is happening anyway, because I'm reading about this, I'm trying to understand it as best I can, but it's complicated. Basically, to summarize, the NHL salary cap next year is going to go up to about $97 million. And then the year after that, estimates from Friedman, estimates from The Athletic, put the cap as high as $112 million. Hear that? 112. That would be a $24 million raise by 2026. In 2 years' time, you could see the cap raised by $24 million. A massive, massive jump. So, now, with that being said, let's turn our attention to the Buffalo Sabres, who we already wonder, do they not even want to spend to the $88 million salary cap? Are they willing to spend near the cap? Because if they're going to be a team that wants to spend to the cap, that wants to put all their resources into winning, they got a lot of money to spend. And where's that money going to go? First, when we come back, we're going to break down what they've got to pay out and then what's going to be left over. And then we can start talking about some moves as we go forward. That's all ahead here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Really interesting conversation to be had right now in the NHL about the salary cap. We'll get to that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Sabres is presented by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search. Match with Indeed. You do want to match. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed's your matching and hiring platform. Over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. You can ditch the busy work, use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now. Support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, Sneaky Joe DiBiase. Again, you want to hit us up on our text club, join subtext.com /LockedOn Sabres to do that. All right, we're talking about the salary cap a little bit today. We're between games. We talked to Lindy Ruff on WGR this morning. Really good conversation about the team on the overall. Just some quick tidbits from that. We talked with him about Rasmus Dahlin and the amount of penalties that Dahlin takes. I want to talk about that on our preview show for tomorrow's game tomorrow because it's becoming a problem. Dahlin taking crucial penalties, letting emotions get the better of him. He is the captain, by the way, allowing that to happen. And Lindy is not hiding from it. Like Lindy's like, yeah, it's happening and he needs to be better. So the coach maybe holding him accountable. Benson and his penalty problem right now, although I personally believe that is more about the way officials are calling him than anything Benson is doing, but there's a lot to get to on that front. We talked about that with Lindy. He confirmed Jordan Greenway week to week. Tage Thompson looking like he'll return to the lineup on Wednesday. He also said Alex Tuch's going to be fine. Tuch did not practice on Monday, but Lindy made it known that, yeah, Tuch's going to be perfectly okay going forward. It'd be a little bit of a surprise, I think, if he didn't play on Wednesday. All right, back to the cap conversation. All right, $97 million in cap space next year. Actually, we're going to talk more about next year, but just to put it out there. That number I threw out, it's a big number. It might have wowed you. $112 million. Huge, huge, huge jump from where it is right now at 88. The Sabres right now on their books for that season in 2 years have $25 million in cap space if the cap didn't go up. They will have, that's the year after. So $49 million. They have $49 million dedicated to their team in 2026. And the cap would be $112. $63 million of cap space in 2 years. Anybody want to buy that they're going to spend $63 million? Maybe. We'll see. The tired excuse that the Sabres have been saving cap space for next year with RFAs to pay, I've said since the summer, has never added up. Never, ever, ever added up. The Sabres always had more room than they were leading on. They were never going to use all of their space on just the guys they need to sign. I think it was an excuse to not spend to the cap. That's until they prove otherwise. I'll believe it when I see it. That the Buffalo Sabres are going to be a team that spends every dollar that is allowed of them to spend to win hockey games. I'll believe it when I see it. So now where we stand, now there's no hiding from it. Right before, there's some hiding from it. Like, we might pay JJ Peterka $8 million. We might need to pay Byram $7 million. There's no hiding from it now. There's too much space. Next year, if the cap is $97 million, the Sabres are going to have $34 million in cap space. $34 million in cap space this upcoming offseason. All right, who do they have to sign? It is a list. It's a good list. JJ Peterka. Can I make some rough estimates here just to put this exercise together? JJ Peterka. How about $7 million a year in a long-term extension? That sound fair? $7 million. Bo Byram. How about $5 million on a long-term extension? Fair? Give or take $1 million? Jack Quinn. Anybody want to argue right now that he's going to make anything more than $2.5 million bucks? I mean, he'd have to really turn it on, and that'll be a bridge deal. So $2.5 million is what I'll put for Quinn. And then Devin Levi, who's having a horrific season so far, $1.5 million. That's just a number that I threw out there, put it out. All right, so that sound okay? Peterka 7, Byram 5, Quinn 2.5, Levi 1.5. That would equate $16 million, which would mean $19 million left to spend. 5 guys. 5 contracts to sign. If you're like, they have everybody else signed, they would need to add 5 players for $19 million. And the most likely outcome is that 2 of those players, maybe even 3, would be vet minimum guys. You could spend $19 million on 3 players, or excuse me, more like $17 million. $17 million on 3 players. They have enough room to do a lot. And right now they've done nothing. And Adams, by reports, is searching. He is actively calling teams. He wants to add to this team without giving up anything that's on the roster right now. Maybe more future types of trades like the McLeod trade that we saw in the offseason. The reporting is that Adams is searching for a trade like this. But it's still, for me, a believe it when I see it type of thing when it comes to the Sabres and how much money they want to spend. And maybe they're searching because they know the cap's going up. Maybe they weren't going to spend. But they like to be a team that's $5 million, $6 million, $7 million under the salary cap because they want their own budget. They don't want to spend all the money that it takes or that it could take to give yourself the best chance to win. They'd rather, we'll spend $10 million below. That's my worry about this team. But that's the math of it. $19 million to spend next year with some rough estimates on what your RFA contracts would be. That's the money for just next year. And then, of course, add in another $15 million the year after that. We're talking about massive amounts of money that the Sabres are going to have available to them in the next 2 years. And what are they going to use it on? What they have everybody signed except for the list that I said: Peterka, Byram, Quinn, Levi. Everybody else is signed. The only money left over is to add. Go add. And that's where we could talk about some ideas going forward. You could throw more out. Marner. I know it's a big idea, but you sign Marner to... There was a clip going around on Sportsnet this morning about Nick Kyprios arguing with some guys that he co-hosts with about Kiprios arguing that Marner's worth $13 million a year, and the guys are laughing at him. And I kind of get it, because Marner's been bad in the playoffs, and if you live in Leaf country, that's all that matters right now. You've been great in the regular seasons. Who cares what you've done in the regular season? Here, we live a different life. To the Sabres, Mitch Marner's worth $13 million. Easy. If the Leafs don't want to give him $13 million a year, I mean, the Sabres got to spend money somewhere. If the cap's going to be that high, you could go. This is the funny thing about it. The Sabres could go make a massive splash trade and overpay whatever to go get Mitch Marner. And they would still have the opportunity to have an internal cap if they really wanted to. They would still be $6 million short of the salary cap by the estimates next year. They have, and that would be to trade for the most expensive player on the market. And they would still have that much room left over. There is no more financial excuse. The cap is going up, and the cap is not just going up a little bit like it has in the past couple of years. The cap is going up. And the Sabres, if they want to prove to their fans they are obsessed with winning, which I don't think many believe, but if they want to show that to fans, then they got to get going. They got to get going on this front. So that's the extent of the details. When we have another off day between shows, we'll go through some big picture ideas other than Marner. Marner is one. We could get a little more in depth on that because he's still without a contract with Toronto, and he's in a contract year. So maybe he's someone to still talk about. Other big ideas, free agency. We'll talk more about that though as the weeks progress. But the Sabres should want an all-in move, like something similar. And the money, obviously, as I mentioned, is not an excuse anymore. When we come back, mailbag, some questions from our listeners reflective of the Sabres right now and where the season stands, some individual questions, all ahead here on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Sneaky Joe DiBiase. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is presented by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. Over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks, the only real money daily fantasy platform with injury insurance. They have an injury insurance policy so that your lineup stays in play even if you one of your players were to get injured. If your player leaves the first half, doesn't return, PrizePicks keeps your lineup live. It's the best place to get real money sports action. Over 10 million users sign up today. PrizePicks withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. They all now offer Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals into your account throughout the season. Sign up today, get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL. Get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app. Use code LOCKEDONNHL. $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. Final segment here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Let's head over to our text club. If you'd like to sign up, ask a question, join subtext.com/LockedOnSabres. Once you sign up, though, everything's on your phone. You don't have to keep going back to the website. All right, let's fly through some trades here. Question about trades. Will there be a trade in the next month? I might want to predict there will. I think, and you know why? I think Adams is feeling the heat. I think Adams is feeling the heat. I'm not saying he'll be fired. I'm saying it's more of an internal thing. Not even like from above. Because it's more, same thing. Kind of a believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see it. The Sabres will spend to the cap. I'll believe it when I see it that Terry Pegula is going to fire Kevin Adams. I could be wrong about that. Right? Like, I was wrong about Granato on that front. I didn't think they'd move on from Granato, and they did. I think it's more from Adams. I think Adams... I don't know personally whether he cares about all the talk when he was hired about he's just a Pegula boy and he's not, he wasn't qualified for the job. That was more in league-wide media, national media, I would say, than local. Although local, you heard it too, of course. Adams should be somebody that's out to prove everybody wrong, right? Me, fans, media, national media, everybody. Adams should be out to prove people wrong, and his team's not winning again. So what does a guy do in that spot? Doesn't he go make a big swing? We already saw him start to take swings. I just question whether he's good enough at his job to get those deals done. And whether the market here allows him to get trades like that done. So I'll lean yes, though. Will there be a trade in the next month? I will lean yes, that in the next 30 days, the Sabres will make some sort of trade. Another question from a texter. What is going on with Ryan Johnson? Has been quiet. What's going on? Ryan Johnson, who, remember, is kind of an older prospect at this point. He is 23 years old. He is not putting up many points in Rochester this season. I did look up, for the purpose of this question, some of his advanced numbers, and I guess they look pretty good, but he's not, 3 assists in 14 games. He's not really making a massive difference. I think if you want him to be an impact player at the NHL level, you'd like to see more from him this year at the AHL level. So it's not going tremendous. He's not someone I'm really thinking about week to week, night to night, because he's not making any noise down there. So it's been quiet, and I think maybe deservedly so. It's been quiet. Next question. Bigger surprise, Greenway or Levi? Greenway, a good surprise. Levi, after a dominant AHL season, a bad surprise, winning only 1 game. Good question. I'll go with Greenway, though. Levi, I know I was high on him. I know I believed that he was someone that could challenge UPL for the starting job by the end of the year, someone that could get close to a 50-50 split. But 22-year-old goaltender having a year like this is not new. It's commonplace. So despite how high I was on him, even I can't say it's surprising. It's not surprising at all that Levi had this year. It's disappointing. And it is a little surprising. No, it is a little. It's, to say it's not surprising at all is wrong. It is a little surprising because every step of the way, every step of his development has gone the way it should. Star in juniors, World Juniors. Okay, well, he should be really good at college, right? Okay, he was the best college goalie that we've ever seen. Okay, so he should be really good at the AHL level, right? And then he was the second best goalie in the AHL. All right, well, if he's the second best goalie in the AHL, he should be able to be a backup. That's where we've fallen off. So this is the first step in his trajectory, I would say, where he's not taken the next step in a row. It's a little bit of growing pains. And I don't know that we've ever seen him at any step in his development go through growing pains. This might be really the first time. Last year, it happened a little bit, but as I've pointed out, his advanced numbers were actually great last year. So I don't agree with last year being growing pains. I think this is the year for growing pains. And Greenway is a big surprise. Greenway is somebody that was not, to me, making much of an impact last year. He was not playing like this at the end in Minnesota. They were ready to move on from him. They had replaced him with Marcus Foligno in the lineup, and they had to decide on which guy to pay, which guy to extend, and they went with Foligno on that front. So I think Greenway, to me, being this important of a player is the bigger surprise. What else do we have? What's a realistic trade target that would elevate the Sabres clearly above Boston? I know it isn't a sexy pick in a trade, but I think you could get Josh Anderson from Montreal. I think you could get him for a top 10 protected first. Thoughts? Josh Anderson is an interesting idea that is not quite the level of player that I would say would clearly put you above Boston. To me, I don't know what Boston's going to be under their new coach. I think that the Sabres are only clearly above Boston if they trade for Mitch Marner. That's it. Any other trade, you're right there with them. You're already kind of right there with them, but I think it would help elevate you above them. Anderson, by the way, is a nice player. I like him. He's a hard-nosed player. He's physical. He's got a really good shot. He's not quite the complete offensive player that you might want. I think you could get him for a first-round pick, too. And you want to tell me it's an upgrade in their top 6? I think I would have to agree with that. But not a player that I'm desperate to see the Sabres acquire at this moment in time. What else we got rolling in here? Let's see. Will Ovechkin still break Gretzky's record despite being week to week? I believe he will. I think Ovechkin is still going to break that record. If he misses, though, it's going to be real close, and he's going to break it very early on next season. Last one. And then I'll get to more of these on our text club if you asked one and you want it answered. What the heck is wrong with Jack Quinn? Is it the left leg injuries? He's never been a great skater, probably average, has to be a below average skater now. Any thoughts? How does he get back on track? That's a good question. And it's a tough question to answer how he gets back on track this season. My fear is there is no way for him to get back on track this season because it's not mental. It's not about his shot. It's not about his feel for the game. It's not about any of that. It's about his ability to skate. And I don't know how you fix that mid-year. That to me sounds like a problem that gets addressed in an offseason where over the course of 3 months, you work with a skating coach day after day after day after day. And in the middle of the NHL season, the middle of the NHL grind, you can't put that work in. You can't, you can, work, you can tweak it, but you can't overhaul your skating. You can massively improve your skating in the middle of a year. So I think, honestly, how does it get back on track? You cross your fingers that it is just injury recovery and that he's going to get healthier and stronger as the year progresses. That's it. It's a finger cross. You're crossing your fingers. Otherwise, I'm not optimistic that Jack Quinn's going to turn things around this year. I think you're talking about more of a long-term turnaround because it's a bigger overhaul than just figuring. Cousins, for instance. Cousins flies. Cousins moves around. Cousins just has to figure out the game, right? Cousins has to settle in. He has to get confident. He has to think the game sometimes a little bit more than he does. Quinn, it's different. So I'd be more confident. I'll put it this way to wrap things on today's show. I'd be more confident that Dylan Cousins is going to turn things around this season than Jack Quinn by a lot. All right. That's going to do it for us today here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Josh Anderson's a good idea. Just an interesting idea even to talk about. If you've got an idea for a big trade with all this cap space that's going to be coming into the NHL, if you got an idea for the Sabres, hit us up, Text Club, or on social media, Twitter or Blue Sky. We'll check it out, and we'll start going through some ideas coming up in the next couple of days and weeks here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. All right, we'll next talk to you on a game day. Sabres and Kings on Wednesday, 10:30 puck drop. We'll talk to you then here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. Check out Steal and Flip on Locked On Fantasy Hockey if you're looking for your Locked On Fantasy Hockey tips every day. And also be sure to check out Joe Marino recapping the Bills-Chiefs game from Sunday over on Locked On Bills. Got his all-22 review up there. Thanks for listening to Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.